Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to discuss the greenhouse effect. Now, a greenhouse effect works much the same way as a traditional greenhouse that's used to grow plants. So the sunlight is able to go through the glass, and that warms the surface of the objects inside of the greenhouse, but that glass does not allow all of the heat to escape. So that causes the inside of the greenhouse to be warmer than the area outside of the greenhouse. Now, the greenhouse effect takes place in the troposphere. Remember, the troposphere is the layer of the atmosphere closest to the surface of the Earth, and this is where much of the weather patterns occur. Now, that ozone layer, that happens in the next layer up in the atmosphere called the stratosphere. And we've talked about chlorofluorocarbons are these ozone-depleting molecules that are found in the stratosphere. And we also mentioned the replacement for those chlorofluorocarbons are hydrofluorocarbons, but the downside to those is that they act as a greenhouse gas, and that action is going to take place in that troposphere, or closer to the surface of the Earth than the ozone layer. Now, the way the greenhouse effect works is solar radiation, or UV and visible light, are going to pass through the atmosphere towards the surface of the Earth. Now, approximately 1/3 of that light is reflected back into space, either by clouds or other particles in the atmosphere, and the rest is going to be absorbed by the surface of the Earth, and that is going to become infrared radiation, which is heat. Now, that heat is going to slowly emit back towards the atmosphere, and that will then come in contact with these greenhouse gases. Now, the greenhouse gases are going to then reflect that heat back towards the surface of the Earth, and this is how the Earth is able to stay a relatively consistent temperature throughout the year. Now, there are 5 main greenhouse gases that you need to know. Keep in mind that there are more greenhouse gases than just these 5, but these are the 5 that are outlined by the College Board that you need to know for the AP exam. The first one is carbon dioxide. Remember, carbon dioxide is emitted during cellular respiration. It is emitted from the tailpipe of fossil fuel combustion or vehicle emissions. It is emitted from decomposition in landfills. And it's emitted during deforestation because we don't have as much photosynthesis happening there to absorb that carbon dioxide. We also have methane. Remember, methane is emitted during anaerobic decomposition, such as within some landfills. It's also emitted in cow farts and some industrial processes. Water vapor, thinking back to the water cycle, is a natural greenhouse gas. Water vapor is not really responsible for climate change or human alteration of the atmosphere, but it does help to trap some heat. Water vapor is emitted when that liquid water is heated up and turns into gaseous water. Nitrous oxide comes primarily from factory use and other industrial processes. And then, of course, chlorofluorocarbons are human sources of these greenhouse gases. These are primarily found in refrigerants and aerosols and solvents. Another greenhouse gas that I want to point out that's not on this list is tropospheric ozone. Remember, tropospheric ozone causes a whole host of issues, but it does have some global warming potential. Now, global warming potential is the estimate of about how much a molecule can contribute towards global warming, and this is really in comparison to carbon dioxide. So we give carbon dioxide a global warming potential of 1, and then we compare everything against that. So methane is a little bit closer to 30, water vapor is much smaller, it's actually less than 1. Nitrous oxide is kind of close to 300, and then chlorofluorocarbons is a huge range because there's many variants on those chlorofluorocarbons, but they do have a pretty high global warming potential, and that includes those hydrofluorocarbons as well. Now, this global warming potential number doesn't really mean much until you take into consideration the concentration of these compounds in the atmosphere. Now you can see on this graph that over the last 100 years or so, we've seen a steep increase in the amount of each of these three identified greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. I do want to point out the scale on this graph. Carbon dioxide is looking at parts per million, whereas nitrogen oxide and methane are looking at parts per billion. So parts per million is a much higher concentration than parts per billion. So this line for carbon dioxide is quite a bit higher than the methane and nitrous oxides. It just doesn't really look like that because of the scale on here. That's why I also included this pie chart on here, so you can see that carbon dioxide is about 65% of all of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Now, in summary, your key takeaway is that the greenhouse effect results in surface temperature necessary to keep life on Earth. So we need that greenhouse effect so that way at nighttime when the sun's not shining, we don't lose all of the heat on the surface. We're able to keep a relatively constant temperature. You need to be able to identify the major greenhouse gases, which are carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons. Keep in mind, water vapor does not really contribute to global climate change. It has a very short residence time in the atmosphere, and it has a very small global warming potential. You also need to be able to identify the sources and the potency of these greenhouse gases. Remember, the potency is measured using global warming potential, and these sources are primarily from burning fossil fuels, deforestation, agricultural practices, and industrial processes. Please leave me your questions here at the end, and I hope that you were able to learn something.